If you're looking at an adoptive family, all you have to do is love this human. That's not all there is. Love does not cover trauma. Same for birth families. Oh, you gave your child a better life. Don't think about it anymore. There's a biological attachment to a mom and a child. The DNA of children stays inside of mom, in her whole body, in her brain, and in her bloodstream for years after she has a child. So be very careful about how you talk to birth families. My adoption paved away a lot of things in my life. How I thought about pregnancy in a relationship that I probably shouldn't have because of my abandonment issues. There's a lot around the adoption talk, and I'm still processing mine. I hope that you process yours in whatever role that you're in, and I would love to process with you if that's what is needed. Welcome to the Keeping Your Power Real Talk on Resilience podcast. I'm your host, Traci Doula. I'm a family and birth advocate, a mentor, and your personal encourager. I wanted to create the space for individuals, families, and professionals who are done with just surviving and want to rise. Because when everything feels like it's falling apart, the one thing the world can't take from you is your power. And that's where resilience begins. It's not just riding the waves or surviving the storms. It's about how to overcome the challenges. So whether you're in the thick of it or reflecting on where you've been, pull up a chair and let's navigate the hard conversations and the beautiful stories that together we can be honest and use empathy and have a desire to grow, all while, of course, keeping your power in the process. Welcome back, everyone, to the Keeping Your Power Real Talk on Resilience podcast. I'm your host, Traci Doula, and I'm just going to talk about adoption today. I am an adoptee, and I want to talk about my adoption story, but I also want to talk about the feelings around my adoption. I want to talk about topics that in the adoption world we don't like to talk about, because if you are in the adoption triad of being an adoptee or an adopted parent, or maybe even a birth parent, sometimes these topics can be really uncomfortable because the perception of adoption is, hey, there's this great family coming together and is going to love this baby as much as possible. And then we don't talk about anything else. We don't talk about the trauma. We don't talk about the feelings that we can't explain as adoptees. And so I want to talk about some uncomfortable topics around adoption. And if you are somebody in that triad, be just open-hearted and with your thought processes, and, this being a safe space for all of us. But if you are not in that adoption triad, again, understand where we are coming from and listen to what I'm going to talk about as an adoptee. And we need to be validated as adoptees. Our feelings need to be validated. And I'm going to talk about that a whole lot more here in a few minutes. My adopted family was amazing. My mom and dad were wonderful people. How did I find out that I was adopted? Funny story. Me and my sister is also adopted. She's 2 years older than me. And she was playing in the living room and I was playing in the kitchen. I was about 6 or 7. And I was always around my mom. Like, I was always at her feet. I was always doing something near my mom. And my sister was playing in the living room and we were fighting. We were fighting back and forth. And she said, "Well, you're adopted." And my mom kind of stopped and she's like, "Well, you are too." So that's how I found out. And it was super interesting. It didn't kind of hit me. I was like, okay, well, what does that mean? So that means that I'm not yours. Like, I'm saying this stuff to myself. And I wasn't upset. I was just curious. And I kind of put it in the back of my head. I really thought it was pretty cool. And I really didn't think about it a lot until I got a little bit older. And then I started asking questions, well, what does this mean? And, where did I come from? And, what was my birth mom like? And what do you mean that, you didn't give birth to me? And my dad was actually way more likely to answer questions than my mom. And knowing what I know now, being 52 and an adult and processing some of this out, I really think it was hard for my mom to talk about it. First of all, she, had a complete hysterectomy when she was young, when she was in her early 30s. She could not conceive at all. And, that was one of the main reasons that they went to the adoption processes. And so it was really hard for my mom to talk about because I don't think that she had processed out totally what it all meant. Knowing my mom as well as I do, I took care of her in the last of her life. Also, she was an avoidant. Knowing what we know now about attachment styles, she was absolutely an avoidant. If she didn't want to talk about, if she was uncomfortable, she wasn't going to talk about it. But asking more questions and then thinking it was really cool, I would tell my friends, hey, it was kind of like a party thing. I'd be around a bunch of people, and this was still being really young, well, hey, I'm adopted, and, wanting to be part of a crowd. And my mom was like, why are you telling, stop telling people. And it wasn't like she didn't want me to say it. It was like, she didn't want it to be this circus act either. And so my feelings being really young was I always felt like I wasn't a part of something, and I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be part of a group, and I felt very alone in a crowded room. I felt like I wasn't making friends well. Although I was liked and I was like a bull, I didn't feel that way. And I feel like I struggled with friendships. The attachment issues were very clear early on. I needed to be present with my mom very often. I needed to be held very often. And I did not like to go to school. I was very afraid of what if I showed up and walked home from school and my mom not be there. If I didn't know what her schedule was, I was not okay. And so the attachment issues were present very early, but I didn't know what they were. And she didn't know what they were. Being in the 70s, didn't know what they were when I was young. And I needed that one friend that I always had through, I knew what classes I was taking. I knew who I was sitting next to. And if that person was not there that day, my world fell apart. I couldn't think. I had no individuality when it came to relationships, even early on. And, funny story about attachment and just breaking down and just, being a ball of mess. My mom made my lunches in elementary school, and we walked to school and we walked home. We lived very close to the school. And remember, this is in the 70s. Things were a lot safer. And I forgot my lunch, and I lost it when I figured that out. And my teacher's like, well, go to the office, call your mom. She'll just bring you your lunch, no problem, no big deal. And she, of course, didn't understand why I was just so distraught. And she was just like, what is happening here? So I left. I went to the office. I did call mom. And she said, sure, I'll bring it. Yeah, I see it here. I knew that I was going to have to bring it to you. It's going to be fine. Go back to class. But she didn't give me a schedule. She didn't tell me when. She didn't tell me the process. She didn't tell me what was getting ready to happen. She didn't tell me I'll be there in an hour or whatever. So I went back to class, and a couple hours went by, and it wasn't lunch yet, of course. And I was not thinking about anything else. What if mom doesn't show up? What if she doesn't show up? What if I don't have lunch? Like, what's going to happen? And very irrational. And so I asked to go to the bathroom because I didn't want to explain my emotions again. And there was a long trek to the bathroom, and I asked to go to the bathroom, and I went and found my sister, and I knew exactly where she was in each class that she had at what time of day. And so I went and found my sister, and she was in a portable outside. So I had to go outside and go into this classroom, and I ran to her, and I just bellowed all over her. And I'm like, what if mom doesn't come? What if mom doesn't come? Sorry, I'm getting kind of emotional. And the teacher's like, go take her outside, see what you can do. And I'm like, Tina, what if she doesn't come? And it seems so silly now to cry over something like this. And she's like, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And so then mom drives up, and I'm just relieved. I'm just so relieved. She's like, why are you crying? And I don't know. I didn't understand. I didn't understand why I had such a huge reaction to not knowing if she was going to show up or not. And this is kind of the foundation and the basis of this emotion that I have had over the years. And I didn't know how to explain it. I knew she was there. I knew she was going to always be there. She had committed to raising me and my sister, and I couldn't resolve the fact that my mom was always going to be there, and I didn't understand why. I had nightmares of, being alone or being stranded somewhere and not being able to get to my family, and I didn't understand why. Throughout junior high and high school, again, I would, just not make friends well, and I was well liked, but the healthy attachment to friends was not there at all. I was either attaching too much, too quickly, or I wasn't attaching at all. And I had friends that were very tolerable, of that. And then in romantic relationships, unhealthy, just needing attention, just making sure that somebody was going to be there and doing everything possible in order to keep that person in my life. So these are the things that I experienced because of just having that foundational abandonment type feeling, and coming from the relinquishment or the termination of parental rights. And I know that that's hard to hear for some of y'all, because in an adoption relationship, when we are talking to maybe an adoptive parent, we don't want them to feel responsible for those feelings. We don't want them to feel bad for those emotions that an adoptee might feel, so we can decode it a little bit and say, oh, well, if you can just love them enough, especially if it's an infant adoption, we're just going to bring this baby home. We're going to give it a forever home, like we're puppies, and so as an adoptee, those types of terminology is invalidating. It's very invalidating because we're trying to, make it emotionally easier for maybe the birth parent or the adoptive parent. And with birth parents, we're, saying things like, oh, it was the best thing for them, or you chose the better life for them, so you should be okay with your feelings. So, when we are looking at this adoption triad, we are tiptoeing around everyone's feelings depending on what role they have in this triangle. So my feelings were very confused by others. Why is she just not emotionally able to be away from her mom? Of course, back in the 70s and 80s, it was, well, she's just clingy, or she just loves her mom, or, those kind of things. And no, it went way deeper than that. Back in the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, when I was, in high school, I wish that the therapy options would have been available to me. And that's why I'm a huge adoption advocate, in that I believe everyone needs to be in therapy, whether it's the birth parents, the adoptee parent, or the adoptee. I think everyone needs to make sure that they understand where the emotional balance is here, because we just don't get that as adoptees on the front side, whether it's chemical or just and the upbringing of not understanding. So as I got older, and adjusting and having some very good self-regulation, things that I developed myself, I just thought that everybody was like that. I thought everybody was, experiencing the emotional unrest, as I was, and I didn't, think it was any different. I was, conditioned or kind of told, that, hey, you don't tell people you're you don't just say those things for fun. I'm not saying that you can't say it, but hey, we're just a private family. My mom was a very, very private person, very private. She was born in 1938. So, the lost generation of, hey. And again, I think she was processing out her own identity around, I can't have children. This is what we're doing, and didn't necessarily want people to know that we weren't biologically hers. I felt that sometimes. But, in the end, it, was a very difficult place in my family to voice emotions. And then, on top of that, not being able to be told the details around my adoption. My mom said, the only education or information that they have, because this was a closed adoption, was that they wanted us raised Christian in the Protestant church. And that was really the only information that she had. Now, I have recently, been able to get my adoption records. There was one piece of paper that was withheld, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But growing up and through, asking a whole bunch of questions, my mom just didn't tell me a whole lot. She didn't say a lot. And I think she knew more. Actually, I know she knew more than I was asking, but she wasn't comfortable with telling me names of my birth mom or birth parents. Given that she was the age that she was, I understand that. Whoever is going to listen to this, if you are an adopted parent, and I understand how uncomfortable that sharing information might be, especially if you don't have it. That's hard. But even if you have it, please be truthful. Please be truthful with the information that you have. Knowing what I know now, I know my mom withheld information, and that's very hurtful. And I wish that I could have an open conversation with my mom. I had a very good relationship with my mom, and she has her own reasons why she did that. Why do I think she did it? I think she did it because she felt threatened. I think that, it's kind of like, hey, I don't want you to have this information because I am your mom. I will always be your mom. I have put in the effort and your mom didn't want you. So why would you want that information? Again, my mom's just not knowing or understanding her identity in the Triad in the 70s and 80s. So if you are having a hard time as an adoptive parent giving information that you do have, please seek therapy and understand yourself. Self-awareness and self-development is 100% the goal here. And not withhold information, because if you withhold information from your adopted child and they find out later, you're going to have a whole lot of other trust issue problems on your hands. Then I got married, had kids. I started asking a little bit more questions, and then again, put it in the back of my mind, because again, as an adoptee, we were kind of conditioned, or I was kind of conditioned to think, kind of fantasizing or romanticizing the okay part of not knowing my birth story. Why would I need to know that? I'm good. My parents were great. Why would I want to know birth family? I would like to know medical stuff, but meh. I'm good with the relationships that I have. Why would I need that? So I kind of told myself it was okay to not have that whole other story, which is fine. But, I didn't really process it well. And I started having kids, and I was like, I wonder what my birth mom was like. I wonder what the medical side of this is. I wonder who my people are. Now, I didn't have an identity crisis. I was just curious. I got to be very curious when I started to be a mom, because I was like, okay, biologically, I would love to know what was going on in my birth mom's mind. In her pregnancy, I'm in birth work, guys. I'm a doula. I'm a family advocate. I do a lot around childbirth. what was my own birth story? What was my own birth story? I didn't have any of those questions. The day came when it was after 21, and I got a phone call from my adopted mom that said, "Hey, I have news for you, and I need to come over." And I thought she was sick. She was very, she was very serious, and I knew something in her voice was different. And she came over and she sat in my living room and said, "Hey, you have two biological sisters. You have the same mom, but not the same dad, that want to have contact with you." And she was very stern. She said, "You don't have to do this. You don't, just know that you don't have to do this." And I knew immediately that whatever I did, I was not going to be able to share with her because her feelings were going to be hurt either way. And I got the information, and I do have two sisters that found me through private investigation, nonprofit-y, reunion type, organization. And I called that person, and he said, "How much information do you want to know?" And I said, "I want to know it all, because now y'all have got my mind just reeling." Now how can I turn back? I was good, but now people are giving me information, and now, I'm very curious. I told him I didn't have a maternal connection to her because I didn't have a maternal connection to my adopted mom. She physically kept me safe, and I loved her because she was doing all of those things. But I had a very different connection to my adopted mom. So I didn't have a connection to my birth mom either. I was very curious. I wanted to sit down with her if I could, to thank her for, whatever road she gave me, and to validate those feelings for her, because my life was great. I had a wonderful life and two wonderful kids at this point. I mean, he said, he told me a little bit more detail about the two sisters. He told me a little bit more about my extended family. Very little about my actual adoption, because the records were closed, as far as what he could get. But he did have my birth mom's name. He knew all about all of that. And he went and proceeded to tell me the details around that. And were shocking to me. And I had to kind of wrap my head around what this really meant with me knowing it and moving forward, which I had a very wonderful, wonderful, wise pastor's wife at that time that said, "Traci, the information that you are obtaining has nothing to do with your identity." And I appreciated that, because sometimes as an adoptees, we can feel very lost in our identity. And she said, "Remember who you are through Christ, as a believer, as a child of God." And that was very helpful. That was very helpful, because she's right. Just because I am biologically related to these people did not change who I am and who I was then. And that was very helpful. And, but I still wanted to know a little bit more, what around my adoption, around the birth, around, all the things. But this nonprofit person that I was talking to, this private investigator, who was working with them, my mom was deceased. And so I was not going to be able to sit down with my mom, which was, it was kind of like this loss that I didn't know that I was going to have. I was like, wow, I'm grieving the loss of someone that I don't know. I'm grieving the loss of someone that I wish I got, was able to sit down with. And so I had to process all that out. And I did contact the two sisters. One just wanted a letter. We wrote one letter back and forth to each other. I do not have contact with her at all. And then I wrote the other one back and forth for a little while and actually talked to her on the phone. And she had a lot of information from our birth mom and their family. And so she gave me timelines, and she gave me a lot of information and those things. And I don't have contact with her today, because, I didn't need or really want that type of sisterly relationship that she wanted and needed. So we just stopped kind of communication. I got some of the answers that I feel like that I needed or wanted, some medical history, that was really what I wanted, but no, nothing about my adoption, nothing about my birth, nothing, really about what was going on in my birth mother's life. So, years kind of went past, and I'm having to still process out this death, that I didn't know that I was going to grieve. I just didn't. So again, new information needs to have grace around it, a lot of grace around it. In 2008 or 9 or so, I had a friend that I went to church with that I was telling her about like all the information that I did have about my birth mom's family and all of those things. And she's like, "Oh, I'm a part of Ancestry." And she said, I'm going to put all of your information in and I'm going to find your family, or I'm going to find some of your family. I was like, okay, whatever. She's not going to hear from anybody. Well, she did. And, I was kind of like, oh, well, who is this person? And I'm not sure that I want to have any contact, but I did want medical information. I wanted a little bit more of medical information. And I also wanted to know if there was any information around like the time of my birth mom's pregnancy and then my birth and those kind of things. And so if somebody had answered, my church friend on Ancestry, maybe I could just talk to that person. And she reached out to a daughter that she had kept. She had gotten married and, had children. And this was the oldest daughter of her family, my birth mom's family. And so she reached out to her and she got an answer back and said, yes, I would be willing to communicate with Traci. So Yahoo Messenger was the thing back then. And we got on that one day and I just asked a bunch of questions and she answered them. And there was not this instant connection. She just was very kind to answer questions. And I got even more, I got information, and education, but did I get any kind of like closure or resolve on my part? And, again, just kind of filing in the information of my story, it did give me, some information and some, closure, I guess. But then, moving forward, I had, other children, they grew up and I came back around to being okay with the information that I had. I always kind of would, take inventory in my head. Do I need to know anything else? Was there places that were missing? And there wasn't. I think the information that I had found, strengthened the relationships that I had around me and strengthened the relationship that I had with my adopted mom. And then, becoming a birth worker and being with people that were giving birth, I was able to understand more, about even that process and the importance of skin to skin and babies being separated from their biological parents will have, some kind of chemical reactions that either happen when they're with their moms or don't happen when they're not. So I was able to support the skin to skin process or keeping baby with mom longer or, those kind of understandings because I was an adoptee and had my own things that I was going through. With all of this comes present day with losing my mom, my adopted mom in 2020 and not having her, which I miss her terribly. She was a hoot, man. My mom was so funny, but we had our things, we had our times. But here lately, maybe not even, I don't know, a couple years ago, I really wanted to dive into the legal records. I needed to have it on paper, who I was. And I don't know if adoptees are out there listening to this. Did y'all do this too? I needed to have the names. I needed to have this person had this person on this day. They thought I needed a better life or situation. Here were my adopted parents. And I wanted to know that process. I wanted to know just the foundational journey. I had a story, but I want it verified. I wanted the story verified. And my sister adopted 2 kids way back when, in, I don't know, the early 2000s or so, or right around there in the mid 2000s, and which was great. And then, I'm engaged to the love of my life who has adopted children, and his extended family are foster parents plus adopted family. And so it's, it's just this ongoing part of me that wants to learn so much about adoption, and the foster system is a whole different program, right? So the story that I had was that I was told that my birth mom during her pregnancy was planning on relinquishing me at birth, and that I went to a foster care idea or a foster care situation only because there was a 6-week time period that my mom could change her mind. And that, but the papers were already going to be signed or were already signed. And, the steps went through motion. She went into spontaneous labor. She went and had me, all those kind of things. So that was the story that I had always been told. And, some situations around my birth mother's death, I always find myself going to the internet and kind of looking around and, wanting to fill in those pieces. And I actually did, find a granddaughter, so she would have been my niece on a obscure page somewhere. And DM'd her, why, what was I wanting out of this? I'm not really sure. Okay. I'm not really I kind of like wanted connection, I guess. I don't know, but not really thinking what this was going to do to her, which looking back, I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. But I was, telling her what I had found out years ago. And she's like, well, how do you know? Good for her. By the way, good for her. She's like, how do you know? And she's right. Messaging this granddaughter and her kind of like opening my eyes to how do you know? I'm like, yeah, how do I know? And I really do want to have it on paper in black and white, like what the legal process was and who I had come from. And I even a few years ago had called a couple of hospitals, and they said that no baby girls were born on the day that was my birthday. So I was really kind of like, is my birthday my birthday? So I started going through the process of figuring out what county to petition or, to fill out the paperwork. And because, if the adoption is finalized in one county, that doesn't mean that you were born in that county. And an adoptee birth certificate is not necessarily the information that is true about a birthday or where you were given birth and those kind of things. That is the significant downfall of a closed adoption. So I went through the motions and all the notarized paperwork and the mailing and the calling. And a few days ago, I got an email and my heart sank, and they said, we have located your adoption records, which would be the final adoption decree, the adoption petition from my adoptive parents, the home study stuff, all of the typed up, these are the specifics of your birth parents. These are the specifics, who they were, what their names were, what their birthdays are, the reason of relinquishment. I got all of that. And I opened up the file, and I was on the phone with Kevin, my fiance, and I thought I was okay with everything. And I started reading. I was like, okay, final decree. I know that. Like, I know my adopted parents' names. I know, those kind of things. I wanted to verify my birthday, and my birthday is my birthday. And then I started reading, and it said baby girl last name of my birth mom. And so there was verification that she was my mom. And I just started crying. And I think it's just the realization of just, just the validation of information that I have on paper. And I am who I am. Like I said before, I wasn't in some identity crisis, but this was really good. This was really good information. And so I went on to read that the things that I had been told before were not necessarily the case. My birth mom was married, but my legal father was not my natural father. So she was married and he was not my father. And I did not know that. I had been kind of told that, who she was married to, she wasn't married to anymore. And then the pregnancy happened and then she relinquished me because she wasn't married. Kind of what I was told. And that was definitely not the case. The relinquishment papers of my birth mom and my legal father have both of their names on it. And it states that they together relinquished me 16 days after my birth. I don't know what happened during those 16 days. I don't know I don't know. I don't know. The 16 days I will probably never know, but I was relinquished on that 16th day to the County Department of Human Services. And they had custody of me until 2 months later, 2 months and some change later, that my adopted parents, that was the day that they got me. The adopted parents say the gotcha day. Now, the 6 weeks or the time process in a foster care situation was still the legal part of, yes, she could have changed her mind, but she did not relinquish me during pregnancy. She did not relinquish me prior. There was no paperwork prior. The termination of parental rights was 16 days after my birth to the Department of Human Resources or Children's Services. So I was in foster care. I believe at that time, a social worker must have contacted the agency that my parents had, my adopted parents had gone through to do all of the paperwork to be able to adopt. And they were called. And then that paperwork started because they said, yes, we want her. And not a lot of questions, but just a lot of thoughts around it. Not really feelings. I really don't know how to feel about that, if I have any feelings about it. And now I am processing a lot more about, that time and, what were the decision-making processes. And I have no ill feelings towards anyone around anything. It says on the piece of paper, they believe that relinquishment of parental rights was in the best interest of this child. And I'm thankful for that. If that's what they believed, I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that they didn't just, say, hey, we're just going to strap in and we're just going to keep going if they knew that they couldn't do that. So I am thankful for that. I have been in therapy, and I want for everyone in the adoption triad to be in therapy. But my adoption and the information around my adoption has helped me understand more about who I am, how I process information, and how I think. And I think that it can be helpful to other people as well in that triad. And if you're not, and if you're just looking at on the outside and you're thinking, well, as an adoptee, you just need to be thankful for your life. It doesn't matter who your other family is. Yes, it does matter, first of all. And if you're looking at an adoptive family and like, oh, all you have to do is love this human, that's not all there is. Love does not cover trauma. Same for birth families. Oh, you gave your child a better life. Don't think about it anymore. There's a biological attachment to a mom and a child. The DNA of children stays inside of mom, in her whole body, in her brain, and in her bloodstream for years after she has a child. So be very careful about how you talk to birth families. I realized that my adoption paved a way for a lot of things in my life. How I thought about my own teen pregnancy, how how I went forward in a relationship that I probably shouldn't have because of my abandonment issues. Because I thought that things were going to be perfect just because I was attaching to this person very quickly. I'm able to have so much perspective around the thought processes of a teenage, crisis pregnancy, or in my birth mom's case, a 30-something-year-old found in a crisis pregnancy, which, let me say, that statistics show the majority of people in crisis pregnancies are not teenagers. They are in marriages that are financially stable. There's a lot around the adoption talk, and I'm still processing mine. I hope that you process yours in whatever role that you're in, and I would love to process with you if that's what is needed. I appreciate your time today, and I will talk more about this in other episodes with adoptees and birth parents and adopted parents. I just feel like this is a conversation that we need to have, and we need to talk about the feelings, and we need to talk about the loneliness and the emotions that we're not allowed to have in each one of these roles. And especially as an adoptee, why wasn't I okay with being alone? I'm coming into loving my quiet time, but there were times where I did not want to be alone. I could not spend the night by myself. I was like, oh, everybody's going to be gone for the day. What do I do? So we need to dive into more, about sharing our feelings and being in our village, in our adoption village, and supporting one another. So those that don't understand it, watch the language and learn more about it. Listen to people. And if you want to encourage, then encourage, by listening and by not invalidating. So I hope that this was helpful. Thank you for joining me. We'll be back soon. Bye, guys. Thanks for listening to the Keeping Your Power podcast. I hope this episode reminded you that your feelings are valid and your voice matters. If it spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to know that they are seen. You can connect with me at tracidoula.com or find me on social media at Traci Doula. On the next episode, I sit down for part 2 of Detra's story, the pastor's wife who escaped her abusive marriage and spent time in a homeless shelter. We talk about emotional abuse, how to recognize it, and how to move forward. I hope you join us. Until then, keep your power in the process.